Want to know the latest and hottest music hitting the airwaves? Don't be left out. Listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Music Podcast. It keeps you on the loop with everything you need to know from pop, rock, hip-hop, and the top 40. And we'll throw in news of your favorite artists, concert and tour dates, and so much more. Listen no further, because this is the gold standard in music podcast.
Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Music Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. As always, I'm your host, Rory O'Toole. Hope you guys are doing well. It's been a minute since the last episode dropped. So, obviously a lot's been happening in music. As always, with the internet, there's always songs being dropped every hour. But today we're going to go through not necessarily the biggest news, but we will have a segment that's called On My Radar, things that are catching my eye, catching my attention at the moment. We're also going to get into Travis Scott's collaboration, let's say, with McDonald's and what that means for the concept of selling out in the year of our Lord 2020. And we're also going to get into Detroit 2, Big Sean's new album. Discuss that. That's been making the rounds. Before ending with my new favorite segment, Story of a Song. This episode we are going to be revisiting Sitting on the Dock of the Bay by Otis Redding. Cannot wait to share the story behind that song with you guys. But to start things off, I thought, let's just get into Travis Scott, his partnership with McDonald's. That is sort of the big story to me at the moment, because it isn't about the fact that it's Travis Scott or it's about McDonald's. To me, it represents this bigger conversation about selling out or going commercial, going corporate, let's say, and what that means for musicians, for companies, and for listeners. So just to give you guys the basics, Travis Scott, he teams up with McDonald's this month for a $6 Travis Scott meal, which bundles Scott's go-to McDonald's order, which is apparently a quarter pounder with cheese, medium fries with barbecue sauce, and a Sprite with extra ice. Gotta get that extra ice, apparently. And Scott is now the first celebrity to get his own McDonald's meal since the chain celebrated Michael Jordan with the McJordan burger in 1992. And also on his website, he is now selling just all this merch that's related to McDonald's and his brand Cactus Jack, including $48 t-shirts, $88 hoodies, $250 pair of jean shorts with a McDonald's logo patch on the buttocks. There's also a $25 10-pack of styrofoam cups. Yes, $25 for a 10-pack of styrofoam cups. $78 blanket, a $45 tie with a picture of a burger on it, a $30 lunch tray with the words "I'm loving it" carved into it, a $65 life-size cutout of Travis Scott action figure from the commercial, and a $90 body pillow that looks like a chicken McNugget. Wow. So this man has his own signature McDonald's meal and is charging you nearly $100 for a pillow that looks like a chicken McNugget. That, Travis Scott, this man knows his leverage at the moment. And it's been successful. People are out there buying this merch and going to McDonald's and requesting the Travis Scott meal or saying Cactus Jack sent me. Pretty cringe, but look, it's working. It's from a business perspective, it's working. And, yeah, quarter pounder, cheese. It's really funny, the taglines for this. It's described, it's like a combination of corporate speak with the ad-libs that Travis Scott is known for. So it says, the Travis Scott meal, a quarter pounder with cheese, Travis style, it's lit. You know, he's known for saying, it's lit, in his ad-libs. We also have a Sprite with ice, and then it has the ad-lib, straight up. And a medium french fries and barbecue sauce with, quote, if you know, you know. Pretty cringy all around there. And as Pitchfork wrote, McDonald's is desperate to humanize itself to a younger audience, and Travis is desperate to be seen as a brand. It'll probably work out for both of them. And so far it is. And so really this is as commercially motivated a move as you'll ever see in music. I mean, working with McDonald's is as commercial as it gets. I mean, I guess you could say, you know, if you did something with an oil company, maybe, with Amazon, maybe that's extra commercial, but McDonald's, I mean, this is, you know, one of the iconic American corporations. And if you're working with them, that's a whole nother level of superstar. I mean, he's the only one to get his own burger since Michael Jordan. That's pretty rare company. But again, this is not about Travis Scott. This is not about McDonald's. We know it's cringy. We know it's kind of dumb, but it's successful. It makes sense business-wise, brand-wise, all that boring stuff and cringy stuff. But what's more interesting is, what does this say about selling out? Now, selling out is one of those terms that is not really in vogue today. If anything, it's kind of used in a sarcastic way, like, oh yeah, you're sellout. No one really earnestly throws around sellout the way they used to, especially during the punk rock movements in the 1990s. It is sort of this generational gap between Gen X and millennials and Gen Z. We'll get into that. But really, it's so when musicians become commercial, you know, there's a certain acceptance of it these days. But seeing Travis Scott work with McDonald's, of all companies, made me think, you know, now's the time to have the conversation about selling out. Every music conversation will circle back to the concept of selling out at one point or another, if you're talking about mainstream artists, because that's just sort of the deal. If you're mainstream, you probably had to sell out at some point, in some way. Maybe not intentionally, but adjacent. Like, it's just the matter of getting on the radio, becoming popular. There's some compromises you have to make. But people make distinctions between what's a sellout and what's not. So let's get into it. This is the Wikipedia definition, the Bible of the internet. Selling out is a common expression for the compromising of a person's integrity, morality, authenticity, or principles in exchange for personal gain such as money. In terms of music or art, selling out is associated with attempting to tailor material to a mainstream or commercial audience. For example, a musician who alters his material to encompass a wider audience and in turn generates greater revenue may be labeled by fans who predate the change as a quote-unquote sellout. It was not until the punk subculture that exploded in the late 70s that the notion that musicians should be completely independent of commercial influence became really popularized, though it was seen as early as the jazz era in America of the 40s and 50s. You had people saying Duke Ellington was a sellout. Also, Bob Dylan was attacked as a sellout to folk music after he went electric in 1965. He started playing an electric guitar. That's a big no-no in folk, or at least early folk, which is all acoustic guitar. Now, this sort of had an effect, actually, on branding as bands and the decisions they would make. There was definitely reluctance especially in rock music, to sign for major labels or to delay it as long as you could, because this would be seen as taking part in a commercial venture. And it continued into the 80s when, bands would be blackballed by fanzines for signing with major labels. And this mainstream success was not seen as a success to their original fans, but seen as a betrayal. However, after a number of bands, they were able to maintain the quality of their records after signing for a major label. By the end of the 80s, the focus of Selling Out shifted from signing to a major label to doing commercials. Tim Yonahan, editor of the U.S. punk fanzine Maximum Rock and Roll, scorned anyone who shacked up with a major label as collaborators. Neil Young mocked the fact that songs became associated with brands on his 1988 album, This Note's For You. He had lyrics like, "Ain't singing for Pepsi, ain't singing for Coke, I don't sing for nobody, makes me look like a joke." That's a bar, ladies and gentlemen. Also, Trent Reznor said, "When I hear Grizzly Bear in a Volkswagen commercial, it kind of bums me out. Somewhere along the line, it became okay to get in bed with a sponsor. More specifically, it became okay for rock bands to talk about." Also, Adele said, "I don't want my name anywhere near another brand. I don't want to be tainted or haunted, and I don't want to sell out in any way. I think it's shameful." Wow. Adele was strong. So you could see, even in 2011, there's still that streak of, I don't want to be a sellout, the whole idea of it being a pejorative and negative trait. It was still, kicking around in the 2010s. But my question is, does it really matter anymore? Does it really matter, the concept of selling out? Does it? Even those who were the most resistant, think of the Sex Pistols. They helped shape punk rock. And their former frontman, John Lydon, was advertising butter. Iggy Pop, another punk rock icon, he was endorsing car insurance. Bob Dylan has done commercials for Victoria's Secret, Led Zeppelin, for Cadillac. I mean, look at summer festivals are just a sea of brands at this point. You have corporations sponsoring tours, but they also sponsor albums and videos. You have TV shows and advertisements that are just filled with songs from famous and well-renowned artists. I mean, a major source of income for all record companies, musicians, and music publishers now is having your music on advertisements, on TV, and in film. Even the Black Keys, who are, as traditional rock and roll as it gets, they've been used a lot. A lot of commercials have used Black Keys songs, and they've maintained that, this is a valid way for them to maintain exposure and to make money. As Dan Arbrock said, "We have more people coming to our shows and buying our records. I think it's like having a song on the radio. As long as your art is pure, who cares where it is?" And, even Kurt Cobain, who had the punk rock, he didn't play punk rock necessarily. He was more the subgenre of grunge, but the punk rock philosophy. Even he said, selling out is sort of unavoidable. He said, "I don't blame the average 17-year-old punk rock kid for calling me a sellout. I understand that. And maybe when they grow up a little bit, they'll realize there's more things to life than living out your rock and roll identity so righteously." I mean, he has a point, because here is the issue. By downloading music for free, the average music fan is tainted and aware of the music industry's economics, and so should be more forgiving when musicians are looking for other ways to generate income in the 2020s, in the 2010s, in just the modern age because, people don't sell records like they used to. People aren't going to record stores. They're not going to buy CDs. They are listening either on streaming services, which pay pennies to artists, or they're just listening for free, downloading it for free. So musicians only have two ways to make money, really, at the moment. It's through merchandise/touring, which kind of go hand in hand, and getting your music for a fee played on a commercial, played in a TV show, played in a movie, played in a trailer, what have you. So really spurning brands saying I'm not going to be a sellout is moved from the sort of working class hard scrabble sort of attitude to really the 1% of musicians, the gilded, the oligarchy of musicians. Those are the people who can afford not to. But most working musicians, they will gladly accept a $20,000 fee if you want to use their song in a commercial or, just for an example. That only the Adeles and the Radioheads and whoever else tries to stay pure from commercial involvement can really afford not to sell out. Arcade Fire's Win Butler, who doesn't use his music in commercials, acknowledges. He said, we can make those decisions based on artistic reasons and not on the financial side. You got to do what you got to do. So he's basically acknowledging we're in a lucky position. We don't have to do that, but you got to do what you got to do. Most bands, you got to do what you got to do means you're going to sell out. You're going to work with commercial brands, with corporations, because that's how you're going to finance new equipment, studio time, afford to pay the whole ecosystem around your band, afford touring. These are like very practical reasons to sell out. And like I said, it's more of a powerful force for Gen X. Gen Z and millennials, we don't care as much. I'm in between Gen Z and millennial. I'm born in 96, kind of in between. I'll admit, I've downloaded lots of music for free. I know what I'm doing isn't paying the artist. So if an artist decides to have their song feature in a commercial or a TV show, I'm not going to call them a sellout because it's not like I'm pure. You cannot speak against someone's purity or lack thereof when you're coming from a place where you've probably engaged in, not the most pure consumption, not the most ethically sourced consumption. If you're not paying for the music, there is something kind of wrong about it. But we all do it. And so this is sort of the compromise we make. Now, even acclaimed artists sell out. Kendrick Lamar did commercials for Reebok, and no one's saying he's inauthentic. His music has suffered since he's gone commercial. If anything, it's gotten better. Drake, he's worked with Sprite. Taylor Swift with Diet Coke. This is just the reality that we live in right now in music, where the music industry is a lot different than it was 30 years ago, 40 years ago when Gen X were growing up, when record sales were really a viable way to make money. They're just not now. That being said, I think we have to have a standard and a line. So not as punitive as these fanzines were about selling out or being collaborators by signing to a major label or doing anything commercial, but I don't want to see artists completely sell it either. I want them to work with companies that are ethical, that have values, that stand for something, that contribute something positive to the world. Travis Scott working with McDonald's, I don't think that doesn't really rub me the right way. That is just seen as purely commercial. McDonald's is, definitely not a saint when it comes to the corporate ecosystem. And, seeing Iggy Pop talk to a puppet of himself is really sad for an insurance commercial. Like, dude clearly has some money issues if you're doing that. So, look, I'm not going to say selling out do whatever you want. We need standards. There should be principles, at least behind some of the decisions on who you work with. But I understand both sides. I understand the purists who say, no, you're tainted by it. But I think realistically, this is a way that musicians have to operate. And I just ask that if they're going to operate to survive in this fashion, that they do it with companies that they actually support or share some sort of value structure with, because if you're working with McDonald's, I mean, that's purely commercial and get your money, fine, but that is on the line of just being a total sellout. But again, people don't really care about the whole concept of selling out anymore, so it's sort of a moot point. It's interesting. We're going to be seeing more of it in the future. This Travis Scott collaboration, I just thought, was the most explicit, most transparent version of this. So it's time to have the conversation. After the break, we will be getting into what's on my radar. Stick around for that.
Always on the go, but the day just won't be one without your Hollywood fix. Let Golden State Media Concepts Entertainment Podcast take care of that. An all-inclusive look of pop culture.
Welcome back to the show. We just got through a conversation about selling out, and now we're going to talk about what's on my radar. So there's a lot that's been released, a lot that's coming out, a lot of rumors, a lot of news, but this is what's on my radar for this episode. And to start things off, on my radar, Naima Shaloub, who's a San Francisco musician, released an album called Cypher, which is Arabic for zero. She is a Lebanese-American vocalist and composer who sings in both Arabic and English. And what I really like about her is she sings American blues, which I'm a huge blues fan. We have not talked enough on the show, actually, about blues, so I'm going to try to fix that in some future episodes, get some more blues talk in here. But regardless, Naima Shaloub, she sings American blues in Arabic, not exclusively in Arabic, but, some of her songs are in Arabic. And I just think that is such a great fusion of two different musical traditions. She is pulling both from the Lebanese and Arabic musical traditions and the lyrical content there and combining it with American blues. And I'm a big fan of fusion in general, whether it's food or music. And I think she finds a way to really marry those together in a really compelling way. And the album was actually a live recording at the San Francisco County Jail. I think she was at the jail for incarcerated women, and she said it was an undertaking that aimed to raise awareness of and inspire empathy for people in prison and people in that facility. And these themes of social justice really dominate Cypher. Although the album isn't just some kind of political statement. It is, focused on a lot of the human experience. But that is something that is definitely flying well under the radar. Not a lot of listens on Spotify, though she did get a profile in SF Weekly. She went on the public radio station here, KLW. So she is getting some press, but urge you guys to check her out. Really interesting fusion, and I think it works beautifully. Also on my radar, big news, Kendrick leaks. 3 songs leaked from Mr. Kendrick Lamar, who we have not heard from in a good while, just like everybody on TDE. On Saturday, out of nowhere, just some unreleased Kendrick tracks made their way onto YouTube and elsewhere. There was Guilty Conscious, there was Somebody, and there was Prayer. That was the names of the 3 songs. Both 3 interesting songs, both 3 compelling songs. Definitely at different points as a finished product. Some felt more finished than others, but that's to be expected from leaks. Oftentimes they're, basically a rough draft of a song, and they just get leaked online. To start things off with, there's Prayer, which I think is the best song that leaked. It has this beautiful piano-driven beat. Feels like it's designed for a soul ballad or a jazz closer, but the lyrics are really what makes the song interesting and I think really elevate the song. So it's essentially told from multiple perspectives. It's told from Michael Jackson's perspective, Martin Luther King Jr.'s perspective, and Kendrick Lamar's perspective. Now, with Michael Jackson, it explores his significance, his brilliance, but also the flaws and the allegations, and Kendrick coming to terms with the shameful past of his idol. You have the lyrics like, "They said that I'll live forever, but the moment he died, more accusations arrived. I had to die too." I think that sort of speaks to Kendrick's idea of, can I separate the art from the artist? Do I have to let my fandom for Michael Jackson die in the face of these horrendous allegations? Touch on that a little later. Martin Luther King's perspective, it's the same deal, emphasizing the positives before wrestling with the negatives. So he touches on MLK's infidelity, lyrics like, "His life became heroic, then tables turned. My creator stripped from being a poet because he yearned other women, infidelity stricken. I can't say he was perfect." Then Kendrick Lamar gives his thoughts on artistry, critical receptions, public pressure. Lyrics like, "Just know the earth is just a rock without the voices of art. Sincerely yours." So, Kendrick, I don't know if he's trying to compare his plight with critics, with what Martin Luther King Jr. and Michael Jackson had to face. I don't think he's trying to say they're the same thing, but he's trying to point us in the direction of no artist is perfect, no human being is perfect, and ultimately it's about whether we can separate the art from the artist, that internal conversation, or the man from his work or his impact. Can one be an immoral person but work for moral causes? Can an immoral artist be recognized for his crimes but still appreciated for his music? He doesn't really land on an answer, but he does have a lyric that goes, "I got a theory that most of y'all won't allow to see. It goes like this: talent doesn't choose morality." So basically what he's saying is some of the most talented people are not good human beings. They're not morally righteous human beings, but do we have to accept that and live with that, or should we demand more? That is the challenge for the audience, to come up with an answer to that. And I don't know if there's a right answer. That is one of the more open-ended and debated questions in music and in art in general. But I have to say, this song, just as the song itself, it sounds album ready. I think it's a good sign for the forthcoming album. I really like this song. Somebody, it's definitely a rough cut. It's very short. Sounds like a blues song, actually, when it comes to its lyrical content. Just very woe is me in its tone and in the just themes. The chorus focuses on Kendrick wishing he was somebody else, while the verse is focusing on his conflicted feelings about fame and how empty his success is. You have some Kendrick humming and singing there as well. I did enjoy the singing. I did enjoy the humming. I thought the rapping was decent, but it's a pretty dark song. I don't know if this signals Kendrick's headspace at the moment or where the album is going to go tonally, but it's quite sad, really, where he's rapping about, he wishes he could be anybody else but himself. That's not where you want to be. I hope Kendrick's okay. Probably just working through some stuff on songs. But yeah, I don't know if that means the tone of all three of these songs is sort of dark and morose. So I would not be surprised if that's what the album ultimately is, but you never know with Kendrick. Lastly, Gotta Love Me. This is probably the worst of the batch. Really low key. Honestly, just generic and boring. Maybe it fits the album and then it would make more sense and therefore more interesting to listen to, but on its own it's completely just brain dead and utterly uncompelling. Baby Keem, who is his cousin, fun fact, appears on the hook, but he has no verses. It seems that he's rapping from the perspective of a materialist in this song. I don't really know. Obviously, we don't know the context. Probably the weakest song of the bunch. Not going to listen to that one again, but I hope we get some news on Kendrick's album because, we need some Kendrick in 2020 to improve things. A Kendrick surprise album drop would do a lot for all of our mental health. Also on my radar, Oceanator, Things I Never Said. This is her debut project, and it came to my attention after reading her feature on Bandcamp. Check out bandcamp.com. Great way to support artists and just so much music on there. Check it out. Oceanator has a grunge and indie garage rock sound. Much of it explores emotional anguish through the lens of the end of the world on this album, with song titles like A Crack in the World and The Sky is Falling. I think the best song, and it's the standout single, is I Would Find You. Great bass line, lovely synths. Sounds like a desperate struggle to find companionship before the world stops spinning, as Bandcamp wrote. I think that's a great description of that song. Heartbeat and Walk With You are a bit more grounded and warm, and ultimately it ends on a hopeful note with the song Sunshine, which says, I'm going outside today, I'm feeling like things might be okay. So, little simple victories like that resonate quite a lot in our time right now in 2020, especially for anyone in Northern California with these fires. Can't even really step outside right now. I'd like to see some sunshine. Lastly is on my radar. Taylor Swift's Folklore is still number 1. 3 months later, she emerged from quarantine with Folklore. We covered it the very first episode I did for you guys. It was that classic surprise release, and it is in its 6th week at number 1, the longest streak at the top of the charts for any album since Drake's Views 4 years ago. And it had the equivalent of 90,000 album sales in the United States, including streams as well as copies sold as a complete package. In the US, it has sold 860,000 copies of its complete album version, counting downloads as well as its various physical versions, and nearly 700 million streams. Woo! Around the world, the album is nearing 2 billion streams, according to Swift's label Republic. And with Folklore's 6th week at number 1, Swift's cumulative weeks at number 1 across all of her 7 chart-topping albums now rises to 46. That ties Whitney Houston for the most weeks atop the chart by a woman in history. Pretty good company to have. It is her fifth album to log at least 6 weeks at number one, making her one of just two acts to have at least 5 albums each with 6 weeks at number one. Only the Beatles also managed the feat. I mean, damn. Taylor, Folklore, what a success. I mean, this is literally historical success. Unbelievable. And contrasting that with Katy Perry, who was just outsold by Metallica. Yes, Metallica, their album S&M 2, their collaboration with the San Francisco Symphony, debuted at number 1 on the Billboard 200 charts. Not number 1, excuse me, number 4. Smile is at number 5. While number 1, I guess, is still Folklore, and then I think Pop Smoke and Juice WRLD are at number 2 and 3. I mean, what a flop so far from Smile from Katy Perry. I discussed that album a few episodes ago. It's not a good album. It's not great music. Katy Perry is not in a good place musically right now. And with Witness flopping and now Smile seemingly flopping, I wonder if Katy Perry ever returns to her former throne at the pop chart, in the number 1 spot, because I don't see it right now. She's sort of lost her creative edge, and it's a far, far cry from when her releases would go number 1 practically immediately. Teenage Dream was certified 3 times platinum, 4 times platinum in the UK, 4 times platinum in Australia. I mean, Smile was forecast for only 60,000 combined sales, which is way behind her last effort, Witness, which launched with 180,000 units, and that was totally disparaged, and Perry herself has acknowledged that album as a failure. So if you're doing worse than that, what does that say about Smile? I thought we hit rock bottom. Is this rock bottom? I mean, part of the problem is she doesn't have a good single off this album. There are no good singles. And if you don't have a good single, it's hard to move up in the charts. But more importantly, I just think she has no growth as an artist right now. Contrast that with Taylor Swift, who came out with this indie folk record. Taylor Swift, indie folk record. That's changing your sound dramatically. Katy Perry is still doing the motivational speech Nordstrom music. That's just like, that's not going to cut it anymore. You got to evolve your sound. She has refused to do so. She contends that Witness was actually an attempt to garner a new sound and have purposeful pop, but it just didn't work. And I guess her fan base isn't particularly rabid. She doesn't have the stands out here pushing her album to number 1. So we'll see what happens with Katy Perry. If there's anything that show business loves more than money, it's a comeback story. So I would not be shocked if they find a way to engineer a comeback Katy Perry number 1 album. But right now, her career, it's not looking great. It's looking like it's on the downslope, frankly. After the break, we will get into Detroit 2, Big Sean's new album. Stick around for that.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the show. We still have Story of a Song coming up at the end of the show. We got through our conversation on Selling Out and what was on my radar. Now, it's time to talk some albums. And one of the more notable albums since I last spoke was Big Sean's album Detroit 2. Now, this is his first album in about 2 or 3 years, I believe, since 2017's I Decided. I guess he took some time off, and this is the spiritual sequel to his 2012 mixtape Detroit and Double or Nothing, which was a collaborative album with Metro Boomin. And Sean made it clear he wants Detroit 2 to be his classic. Now, before getting into the album, into the nitty-gritty of it, this is really about the narrative of Big Sean. The character in the popular imagination of Big Sean. Now, he's been making the rounds with the press. He's actually getting somewhat positive reviews of the album, and he's had some revealing interviews, notably with Craig Jenkins of Vulture, where Sean opened up about his mental health struggles. Said he was struggling with depression and anxiety from fame, from just natural career worries. So he's been going through it. And he's really pushing through the narrative right now that Big Sean is back. Big Sean is spiritually satisfied, is in a much better place mentally, and it's going to translate to the music. And the album definitely touches on that, and we'll be getting into it. But like I said with Katy Perry, show business loves a good comeback story, and it's not like Big Sean had some kind of flop or just had some kind of scandal. He did not, but he sort of underwhelmed his entire career. He's been overshadowed. So really, they're pushing the narrative that, this is Big Sean's time to shine. This is his moment to finally be recognized for the value he's brought to the rap game. And I think that this album is partly on the way to achieving that, but I think ultimately it fails its greatest ambition, which is, Big Sean being talked about in the same conversation as Kendrick Lamar and Drake and J. Cole and his contemporaries there. We'll get into that more later. To give you a sense of the change that Big Sean has gone through, this is what I wrote about Big Sean, I think a few years ago. This is when Finally Famous, this is probably a few years actually, when Finally Famous' debut album came out. This is what I wrote. Wait, the guy you only listen to when you're in a Foot Locker? Yup, that dude. Finally Famous is not a good album. Big Sean is not a good rapper. But these are just small details that get in the way of a far more important point. Big Sean was the last quote-unquote cool rapper. Not to say that Mr. Sean is genuinely a cool person, but he was the last rapper whose entire appeal was built on convincing the listener that Big Sean was capital C cool. The cool rapper has a long history. The origins of the MC lay in work in the crowd, essentially saying cool shit to compliment the DJ. Curtis Blow invented the cool MC. Rakim expanded cool to a streetwise sensibility. Biggie was cool but weary. Jay-Z was cool and calculating. The cool rapper was the industry standard. But this album was the end of the smooth rap persona. The music was moving away from the iPod Nano to the jailbroken iPhone. Messy and vulnerable. Rappers would no longer glide effortlessly from the block to the boardroom. They were heartbroken but heartless, delightfully weird, wounded, and innovative. Rappers are more human, but less cool. Big Sean was. So that's sort of where Big Sean was. He had this persona of smooth MC, Mr. Steal Your Girl, great fashion sense, really smart, just sort of Mr. A-Team, but not a lot of depth to him. Not a lot of emotion, not a lot of vulnerability. Those weren't really in his repertoire. He got signed to Good Music, Kanye West's label, and he had a few hits. Obviously, I Don't Bleep With You was a massive radio smash. Dance was another big one. He's had some charting success. He's still a big name, but ultimately he just wasn't that special. He wasn't that notable, really. He was always in the shadow of his own label mates like Pusha T and Kid Cudi, not to mention of his off-the-reservation mentor, Kanye West. He's sort of the B team of his generation relative to classmates like J. Cole, Drake, Kendrick. Big Sean is eager to finally carve out some respect for himself with Detroit too. And with the help of Kanye West and Hit Boy, who has been just on a tear lately. They executive produced the album. He's building on his reputation as a rapper who'd rather count his blessings than cash. He's prided himself on growth on this project. So he's really tried to oil the media machine to expect an album that has depth, that shows us a new Big Sean, and shows us classic Big Sean. Now, as far as the positives go, I think the main one is just the collaboration list. He invites everybody. This is a one big party. You get A-listers and rising stars. So you get Anderson .Paak, you get Diddy, you get Young Thug, you get Post Malone, you get Eminem, Travis Scott, Lil Wayne, Ty Dolla $ign, even the late Nipsey Hussle. And you get some rising stars in the Detroit rap scene like Sada Baby, Cash Doll, Boldy James. So lots of names. Even get Stevie Wonder, Erykah Badu, Dave Chappelle, 3 different versions of Story. And that is just really cool to have all those names on one project, and speaks to, I think Big Sean is a well-respected or well-liked person in the music industry. You know, they're not going to work with you if, I guess he could have just dropped the bag and got anyone he wants, but generally people like to work with people. If you're going to have that many A-listers, you're probably well-liked. So, and he seems like a likable dude. I believe it. The album opener, Why Would I Stop, sets the boastful but matured Sean tone he wants and persona that he wants to portray on this album. Second song, Lucky Me. It's kind of brilliant. Not in the beginning, but there's a beat switch in the middle that becomes just an up-tempo trap song. And that is one of the more brilliant pieces on the album. That beat switch is just so smooth. And Sean increases his flow on that, demonstrating his range on an otherwise slow and simple song. Nipsey has a good posthumous verse on Deep Reverence. Now, we talked about it last episode as a notable song, and it is, really cool to hear Nipsey again. And Big Sean is really opening up on this. He has lyrics like, should be a billionaire based on the time off I'm not taking. Probably why the blank around me get crazy and we lost the baby. So he's saying that he lost a baby. That's as vulnerable as it gets. And I've really never seen Big Sean this human and honest. On Dark Sky Paradise and some other projects, he touched on it a little bit, but not to this degree. Kind of impressed by that. Body Language. It's a nice romantic track. I'm not really sure how it serves the theme, but it's nice listening. There's a fun Dave Chappelle appearance where he tells a great story about Danny Brown. Just, if you can get Dave Chappelle on your album, that's pretty legendary. Harder Than My Demons is probably the most dynamic song on the album. Sean has finally let himself go, really letting the energy flow through him. He's such a subdued performer that it feels good to hear some emotion interjected into his voice. But it's also marred by some anti-vax lyrics that we'll get into later. The Wale feature on Guard Your Heart makes a conscious political point on a nice sparse piano beat, which also features Anderson .Paak, who is basically a cheat code for features. And by far the best and most ambitious track on the album is Friday Night Cypher. It stitches together the past and the future of the Detroit hip-hop scene. It's like 10 minutes long. You get T Grizzly, Payroll Giovanni, Cash Doll, Boldy James, Eminem, who actually has one of his better features of the last few years. He actually performed pretty well, and Eminem's been very hot and cold the past 5 years or so. And it's just a fun, infectious song, lots of energy. Now, I doubt they were all in the same room when they recorded this, but it does still have that sort of cypher, late night Detroit rap club or like late night cypher that Detroit was famous for, that 8 Mile sort of brought into the mainstream consciousness. Feels like that a little bit. And I just, that was really cool to see Big Sean get all those names together. That was just a great tribute to Detroit, his hometown, and to the music scene there, which is blowing up big time. Now, as far as the negatives, definitely number one, bashing Western medicine when we're in a pandemic. Specifically on Lucky Me and Harder Than My Demons. On Lucky Me, Big Sean raps about how he's diagnosed with a heart condition at 19, only for a neuropath to cure it with magnesium. He then says, "That's how I know Western medicine weak." Also on Harder Than My Demons, he says, "No sir, I don't even do flu shots." Alright. We're in a pandemic. We are in the worst medical crisis in 100 years right now. Why are you rapping these lyrics right? That is the last thing we need at the moment, is people spreading more anti-vax BS. That is just trash from Big Sean. Absolute garbage opinion. Your platform is way too big to spread this misinformation. Really disappointed in that. That's just really whack and just really marred those songs that are... Actually, I like those songs, but when you have lyrics like that, dude, I'm fully out. I'm just out of the song. It's not valuable at that point. So that was just really terrible and almost ruins the album, but it's only on 2 songs, so I'll overlook it. Another thing, 21 songs, that's just too much, man. 21 songs, what are we doing? Cut down from there. There are definitely some filler songs, so, you know, if you wanted to do 2 volumes, I don't know why you need 21 songs on one project. It's too much. The Post Malone feature on Wolves is just straight up bad. Not good. Not good. ZTFO, that feels like a song that 21 Savage passed on. Like, that beat is perfect for 21 Savage, and maybe he passed on it and Sean picked up, but it does not suit his style, nor does it really bring anything to the table. Lithuania, the song with Travis Scott, this will probably be the biggest radio hit from it, but honestly, it feels like the Dark Sky Paradise project, where it's Sean trying to hop on a sound that doesn't really suit him, but keeps him relevant. I think Travis really mailed it in with his contributions on that as well. So I will say this is probably Big Sean's best project. Better songwriting, better production, handful of songs that really work, but if this is the best he can do, you're still on the B team. After the break, we will be getting into Sittin' on Dock of the Bay, the story behind that classic track. You're going to want to hear that.
Want to find out what movies to go see? Then check out the GSMC Movie Podcast. It's your ticket to the latest movies, whether it's a new blockbuster event, romantic, comedy, or action flick. This show has got it all covered. They talk some what to go see now. Don't bother. What's hot on Netflix and everything in between. That's GSMCpodcast.com/movie-podcast. When it's all about the movies, it has to be this new show. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the show. As promised, we are revisiting Sittin' on the Dock of the Bay, Otis Redding, one of the most memorable, greatest, and classic songs of all time. This is just an iconic track, and the story behind this is just really funny, tragic, and beautiful at all times. So just to give you the basics, this hit number one March 16th, 1968, and it stayed at number one for 4 weeks. It was co-written by Otis Redding himself and his guitarist Steve Cropper. It was recorded by Redding twice in 1967, including once just days before his tragic death in a plane crash. The song was released on Stax Records in 1968 and became the first posthumous single to top the charts in the United States. The song, again, was not finished before he died. On a December night in 1967, Otis Redding was flying in his own small private plane from Cleveland, where he just performed, to Madison, Wisconsin, where he was going to appear the next night. It was a rainy and foggy night, but he wanted to make it to the next show. He didn't want to miss the gig. 4 miles away from the Madison airport, Redding's plane crashed into Lake Monona. 7 people died in that crash, including Redding. He was only 26 years old. And Otis Redding, he had never really become a crossover star in his lifetime. His singles, they had done well on R&B radio, but his highest charting single on the Hot 100, 1965's I've Been Loving You Too Long, peaked at number 21. His song Respect went number 1 in 1967, but not sung by him. Covered by Aretha Franklin. Redding had actually written and recorded the song 2 years earlier, but Otis, he would admit that it wasn't really his anymore after Aretha had done her version. She elevated it big time. I don't think anyone would argue otherwise. Now, Redding was famed for his electrifying performances, which were gradually expanding beyond the R&B circuit in the lead up to his death. Grace Slick, who was the lead singer of Jefferson Airplane, saw him at the Fillmore West in San Francisco in 1966. She said, "It was the most stunning performance I had seen up to that point. I'd never seen anybody with that much positive thrust, for lack of a better term." Yeah, Redding, he was a magnetic, sensual presence on stage. Just what you would want from a soul singer, the prototypical soul frontman. And he was a rising star, eager to switch up his sound and appeal to a mainstream audience in the lead up to his death. His star was on the rise following his successful tour in Europe that had garnered the attention of the Beatles, a string of well-received performances at the Whiskey A Go-Go in L.A., and the legendary showing at the iconic Monterey Pop Festival in 1967, where Redding had essentially blown the minds of a crowd of white hippies. That performance had the biggest effect on him. Monterey had a powerful effect on Otis, recalls Stanley Booth, who interviewed Redding for the Saturday Evening Post. He saw a huge crowd of white kids going nuts over him, and he began to believe he could follow in the footsteps of Sam Cooke and Ray Charles. Now, just to touch on the white-black audience dichotomy here, many of the R&B acts, they did well with black audiences because American radio, which essentially controlled American music, was very segregated. They had black music for black people, white music by white musicians, and so on. There was not a lot of mixing going on. But if you were talented enough as a black artist, you could break into the mainstream, which was also code for the white audience. Now, Sam Cooke had done that, Ray Charles had done that, and Otis Redding was gearing up to do that. He'd also been inspired by Bob Dylan and Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, as everyone was inspired by that album. He was hoping to switch his sound, come up with something more layered than the hard southern Memphis soul on which he'd made his name on. He was kind of moving into soul folk, if you will. It was going to be more carefully crafted, especially in studios. He was really moving towards more intentional, softer, but more in-depth, more touching, more really universal sort of themes and sounds. He was really going for something that would not only appeal to mainstream audiences, but really move towards something more poetic and honest than just the rough and tumble good vibes of the soul that he was doing, or just standard heartbreak ballads. But as focused as he was at going in the studio and crafting his music, he did have a deal to go to San Francisco and do 6 nights at a jazz club called Basin West. And so he flew over to San Francisco. He fulfilled his contract, and as a thanks, Bill Graham had him hole up at his home in Sausalito, his houseboat, as a thank you for doing the 6 nights, as well as to allow country boy Otis Redding to get out of the city and away from the screaming fans. So he really spent his days quietly looking at the water from Waldo Point in Sausalito. Freed from the usual demands of travel, he was able to relax, write songs. His road manager, Earl Sims, who was known as Speedo, said he was the only witness the day Redding picked up his guitar and wrote a new song that began, "Sittin' in the morning sun, I'll be sittin' when the evening comes." Obviously, that's the opening lines to Sittin' on the Dock of the Bay. Speedo witnessed it. He's writing it literally looking out onto the bay. That's what inspired it. Now, Cropper helped Otis fill out the rest of the verse. And Redding didn't have much more than the basic chords and his first verse about sitting and watching the ships, and the chorus he developed. Then he put the song aside for a while. That was Otis, Cropper said. He always carried his guitar with him, but not in the case, and he'd have an idea and just start writing. He always had 14 or 15 ideas in his head, totally unfinished. When Otis returned home, he played the song for his wife. My comment at the time was that it was very different. unusual for him, she said, meaning she didn't really care for it. He said, well, I'm going to change my style. Going to be different. That October, Redding had surgery to remove polyps from his vocal cords. While recuperating, he couldn't speak. He grew a beard and spent hours in silent contemplation. He had to communicate actually by writing notes, though he also wrote more songs. By late November, he was finally good to go, and Cropper says his voice sounded better than ever. He recorded more than 30 new songs in a burst of creativity at the end of that month and the beginning of December. Most would end up on posthumous releases, including Hard to Handle, The Happy Song, and I've Got Dreams to Remember. There is some debate about when it was finally recorded. I won't bore you with the details, but the recording of Sittin' on the Dock of the Bay is described as positive, full of excitement and optimism. The whistling at the end of the song actually came in a section earmarked for vocal ad-libbing. On one early take, Redding actually sputtered, and the engineer, Ron Capone, told him, "You're not going to make it as a whistler." The initial reaction to the song was actually kind of mixed. Cropper said he played the song for his wife Zelma and Johnny Lee Blue Moon Odom, the major league pitcher who hailed from Otis's hometown of Macon, Georgia, and was hanging out during some of those sessions. Zelma Redding apparently did not like the new approach. She reportedly felt his post-surgery songs were too strongly Beatles influenced, and has been quoted as saying that her husband told her, "Boy, when I go back out there, I'm going to be the new Otis Redding," to which she replied with a hint of dismay, "Oh God, you are changing." Redding responded, "It's time for me to change in my music." In the middle of the sessions, Otis went back to the road. "I'll see you Monday," were his last words to Mr. Cropper. Redding died on Sunday, and on Monday, according to Cropper, Atlantic Records executive Jerry Wexler called Jim Stewart demanding a new song. Jim asked, "What do you have ready?" But I said, "I don't have anything mixed." Well, they said, "We need something," because these music executives know that when a musician dies, that is when record sales will probably be at their highest. So Cropper had to spend the next 24 hours mixing the song the day after one of his best friends died. He said it was one of the hardest things I ever had to do was mixing that song. I bet that's an understatement, frankly. The song was finally released on January 8th, 1968. Redding's death was definitely of interest, but really what brought the song to the top was the lyrics, which spoke to every working man who wanted to get away from the bosses and just relax a little, as Rolling Stone magazine put it. The lyrics also resonated powerfully with soldiers in Vietnam, according to Doug Bradley and Greg Werner's "We Gotta Get Out of This Place," the soundtrack of the Vietnam War. And finally, the single topped the charts on March 16th. The legacy of the song is obviously wide-ranging, and the biggest legacy of it was establishing the posthumous number one hit. It's sort of become a staple for certain criteria, certain class of musician, from Janis Joplin to John Lennon. The latest, I think, was XXXTentacion, but Otis was the first to have that posthumous number one hit. The song is ranked as the sixth most played composition on American radio and television in the 20th century. It has gone triple platinum and been covered from artists from Cher to Bob Dylan. Rolling Stone named it number 26 on its 500 greatest songs of all time. And the song really resonated for reasons well beyond his death. As I said, it spoke to people. It's a deeply weary song, especially touches on moving all the way across the country, trying to change your situation, and just sort of finding yourself alone at a crossroads, maybe at the end of a long journey or at the beginning of a new one. It's very poetic. It's very wistful. And his voice is light and weary on it. Very careful melody. You know, that's not the hard-charging Otis Redding that had really established himself in the minds of most soul music listeners. He was definitely changing his sound by then. And the song, it has these nice little touches. You get a nice bass line, guitar chimes, just perfectly timed burst of horn sections. It really is just a perfectly crafted song. And unfortunately, we can only guess at what might have happened if Redding hadn't died. But if this was the direction he was pushing, I feel like there would have been masterpiece after masterpiece. He had clearly come to really understand his voice and what he could do with it and what he wanted to say musically and the kind of songs he wanted to create. It is a just full stop tragedy that we never got to hear where he was going. He's only 26, so young. But with this song, he really cemented himself in the public consciousness and finally achieved the crossover success he was chasing. He's one of the greatest singers of all time, one of the most fascinating what-if cases in music history, and this song is one of the more immortal tracks of the 20th century and one that will speak to the human experience for centuries. Just one that I would blast into outer space and show the aliens, tell them what our culture is. It's that great a song. That will do. Great story there. Really enjoyed everything this episode explored. Thank you for tuning in. Remember to subscribe. That really helps us out. Follow us on all the social media platforms. Until next time, take care, y'all.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Music Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.